honest man could go from sunrise to its set without encountering agents of the state or government. But a sorry cloud of tyranny has fallen across the land, brought on by the hollow men who did not understand that for centuries our forefathers have fought and often died to keep themselves and to themselves, to fight the rising tide. That have been the smallest battles we surrender to the state. We enter in a darkness whence we never shall escape. When they raise their hands up.
Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of No Treason, the Lysander Spooner Anarchist. I'm your host, Crook, from the No Treason Facebook page, which I moderate with two other guys, Hammy and Malvo. You can check us out and like our page at facebook.com/No Treason Podcast. We're also hoping to get a Twitter account and a YouTube channel up and running here shortly, and when we have that information available, we'll get it to you. I'm very excited to kick off the show today. I wanted to start by talking a little bit about Lysander Spooner, whose seminal work, No Treason, is the namesake of our podcast. So I wanted to talk a little bit about why Spooner is important, who he is, what he accomplished in his lifetime, and why we as libertarians, anarchists, voluntarists should care about him. So I'll jump right in. Spooner was born in 1808 in Athol, Massachusetts. He was the son of a landowner and a farmer. And when he turned 16, his father gave him the option to leave the farm and make his own way in the world, or to stay on as an indentured servant and work on the farm until he turned 25. And in exchange for his labor, his father agreed that he would provide him with food, lodging, and what he called good educational advantages. Lysander chose to stay, take his father up on his offer, and entered into a contract with him. When he did leave the farm at the age of 25, Lysander got a job as a court clerk in Worcester, Massachusetts, where he made the acquaintance of two attorneys who were impressed with his intellect and favored the abolitionist views which he had developed as a young man. So they took him on as an apprentice, and after 3 years, Lysander sought to open his own law practice. However, Massachusetts state law at that time required that individuals who did not have college degrees complete 5 years as an apprentice, whereas college graduates were only required to undergo an apprenticeship of 3 years. So Spooner actually argued before the Massachusetts state legislature that the law was an abuse of power by the legislature and that it effectively offered the rich artificial protection from the competition of the poor. And he made some headway. The statute was actually repealed, and Spooner, by essentially litigating for his right to litigate, earned the right to begin his own private practice that year. His law practice itself, however, proved to be less than successful, largely due to his outspoken deism and radical abolitionism, both of which he exhibited in a series of published pamphlets and articles over the course of his life. He gained notoriety as an abolitionist for going against the conventional wisdom even within that movement. At that time, the generally accepted authority on abolitionist philosophy was William Lloyd Garrison, who was the editor of the abolitionist newspaper, The Liberator. And his basic assertion was that the Constitution implicitly authorized slavery through the intent of its authors, which Garrison inferred through historical and political context, and that the Constitution and the government established by the Constitution must therefore be overthrown to achieve abolition. Spooner, however, through his work, The Unconstitutionality of Slavery, was the first to proclaim in writing that not only was slavery unconstitutional, but that an interpretation of the Constitution based on the inferred original intent of its framers was inherently flawed. He asserted instead that the highest law of the land was, by scientific necessity, natural law, that the Constitution was no more than a contract between the government and the people, and that no court which did not hold the existence and legitimacy of slavery as a preconceived notion, could, from the language of the Constitution alone, surmise that it either authorized or endorsed slavery. This was an argument that was subsequently adopted by other abolitionists, probably most notably of which was Frederick Douglass, who was the famous former slave turned abolitionist. During the years leading up to the Civil War, Spooner gradually abandoned his law practice and decided instead to become an entrepreneur. Seeing that postage was extravagantly expensive at that time, 13 cents a letter, which adjusted for inflation is roughly $3 a letter now, he believed that he could provide a more affordable alternative to the post office. So he founded the American Letter Mail Company, a private mail delivery service, which was actually pretty wildly successful in its day in New England and the Mid-Atlantic region, both in monetary gain and in achieving its stated goal of reducing the price of mail delivery. The federal government, however, sued Spooner, asserting that the Constitution gave the federal government the right to establish a post office and deliver mail as part of its express powers, and that Spooner was therefore implicitly prohibited from doing the same. Citing the 10th Amendment, Spooner argued that because he was not expressly prohibited from competing with the post office, there was no constitutional authority for him being prohibited from doing so. The case ended with Spooner basically being litigated into bankruptcy before he ever got the opportunity to argue his case in an appellate court, and the American Letter Mail Company was disbanded. And Spooner subsequently wrote and published a pamphlet which presented the argument that he never got to make in court. When the Civil War broke out, Spooner once again broke away from the abolitionist establishment by supporting what he believed was the right of the southern states to secede. He even published a series of articles defending Southern secession entitled No Treason, the most popular and widely quoted of which is number 6, The Constitution of No Authority, in which he makes several quite provocative and, even by today's standards, controversial assertions, many of which are considered to be pillars of modern libertarianism and anarchism. For example, he proclaimed that there's no law but natural law, that natural law is as observable and objective as any law of physics or nature. He also said that any statute law established by government is either a reiteration of natural law and therefore superfluous, or in direct conflict with natural law, in which case its enforcement would be criminal because natural law is superior to statute law. Statute law is subservient to natural law. He believed that the Constitution, being subservient to natural law, is merely a contract between the government it establishes and the people who explicitly agree to its terms, and that no person, having not explicitly agreed to the terms of that contract, can be held accountable for violation of its terms, including those terms regarding treason, which is, of course, what the Confederacy and its officers were being accused of. He said that betrayal of or opposition to the government established under the Constitution is only treasonous if it's perpetrated by a person who has explicitly agreed to the terms of the Constitution. And obviously, living in the early to mid 1800s, nobody who was alive at that time was alive during the framing and ratification of the Constitution. So he felt that nobody in his lifetime or after could be said to be bound by that contract. He also said that the government, being made up of individuals, possesses no rights of initiatory force that individuals alone don't possess, and that any claim of the implied consent of the people is a usurpation of natural law. He stated that the Constitution and the government it establishes are moral insofar as they protect the rights held by their adherents under natural law, and are equally immoral insofar as they violate those rights. And his main point, his conclusion, was that the Constitution has either implicitly authorized the immorality of our government or has been powerless to prevent the perversion of the moral government which it explicitly created. And in either case, he argues, it is essentially useless in the preservation of rights. So those are basically the cliff notes of No Treason, number 6, the Constitution of No Authority. But those points are, as they are in all of Spooner's works, expounded upon in great detail. The logic is concise, the language is dense, and the arguments are absolutely brilliant. And for many people, these are ideas that are completely new, they're uncharted territory. And even if you aren't 100% convinced by Spooner's arguments when you first read them, you still are probably going to come away from them looking at political philosophy, looking at social contract theory in ways that you haven't before. Spooner was obviously a very complicated and interesting figure. I mean, he was an abolitionist and a secessionist. Those are two things that don't usually make their way onto the same resume. But Spooner was also logically pure. He believed that the reason that the North decided to wage war against the South when the South declared its secession had nothing to do with slavery. In fact, he said that the war waged against the South by the North essentially was done so for the purpose of proving that men could be forced to accept a government that they don't want, and that they don't accept, and that they don't explicitly agree to. And that was a notion that Spooner rejected on a wholesale basis, and that he rallied against and argued against his entire career, and indeed his entire life. So I think that's all I wanted to get through today. That's a good introduction to Spooner. It's a good start. And we're going to continue going forward throughout the weeks and months, just seeing how many of these we can get out. I'm not sure if this is going to be a weekly thing, a bi-monthly thing. I'm just going to see how many of these I can churn out, and we'll fall into a groove at some point. A few things that I want to have up in the on-deck circle are some more about Spooner's works on natural law, and possibly some jury nullification if we can get to it. So, again, please like us at facebook.com/No Treason Podcast, and drop us a line. Let us know what you want to hear a podcast about, and we will do our best to deliver. Thank you again for joining us for the first episode, and we will see you next time.
So if ever a man should ask you for your business or your name, tell him to go and fuck himself, tell his friends to do the same. 'Cause a man who trades his liberty for a safe and dreamless sleep doesn't deserve the both of them, and neither shall he keep.